Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today's ERA Live session will be focused on the topic of new tariff policies and how they are affecting the electronics components industry. Before we get started, audience members, please be sure that your devices are muted. If you would like to ask a question, we do ask that you type them in the chat box, and we will try our best to get to your questions as time allows. This session is being recorded. We will post all ERA Live recordings on the website and our YouTube channel within 24 hours of this session's conclusion. Walter Tobin, ERA's CEO, will introduce today's special guest speakers. So with that, Walter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And welcome, everybody. This certainly is a topical topic, if you will. Just a couple of ground rules before we get started, introduce our panelists. This is a politically free call, so we're not going to get into any of the politics of tariffs and are they good, are they bad? So let's not have any questions about that. And also, our two panelists working for Ohmite, one of our valued ERA manufacturing members, and they're here to talk about what they see as a manufacturer, not specifically Ohmite, but what they see and hear other manufacturers are doing. So when they talk to us about what they're doing, it's not specifically what Ohmite is doing. So please, don't ask. They're not revealing any secret sauce, but let's keep it, politically free. And also, we don't want any company's name mentioned on this call. I don't want questions, or the panelists are not going to talk about a specific manufacturer or a specific distributor. It's really agnostic. It's really about the tariffs and have us all leave the call a little bit smarter. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Dave and John.
Go ahead, buddy.
My name is John Orso. I am the Vice President of Global Supply Chain and Operations for Ohmite Manufacturing. I'm actually in Matamoros, Mexico right now. We're a big importer and exporter because of our license here in Mexico. We have a warehouse in Brownsville, Texas. We also have a manufacturing site in Truro in the United Kingdom.
Come on in, Dave. I'm Dave Foster, and I'm on the sales and marketing team at Ohmite, and I've been with the company about 6 years, and report into someone that many of us know, Mr. Greg Pace, who is our president.
Good. Thanks, David. And also, we've asked you to mute your mics. If you have any questions, we have a chat room, so feel free to load your questions in the chat, and Kate and Claire will be monitoring the chat room, and we'll be stopping the session periodically to take questions. We'll read the questions from the chat room. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to really turn the first question over to John and Dave, and you can do a ham and eggs. But I wonder if you could just take us back to the beginning and answer some questions, John, like what are the tariffs? What are they based on? How does a manufacturer ensure that the tariff is correct? When do they get applied and all that stuff? I wonder if you could just, start at the beginning, so we're all kind of baselined about, there's so much talk about the tariffs, but what are they and all of that to maybe educate all of us?
Well, the official definition, right? Tariffs are taxes imposed by a government on imported goods. But, for the rest of us, I think we all know that it's just extra cost in the supply chain, right? For everything we do. Tariffs are going to be based on country of origin, first of all. So when you hear, tariffs are levied against, one country or another, it's based on the actual country of origin, and that's coming into whatever country levies the tariff. So for example, if the US puts a tariff on, say, Mexico or the UK, it's based on a certain percentage. And then it can also be broken down to another topic, or another specific item, which is an HTS code. And that's how they break down what exactly, qualifies for a tariff. I think we've all seen on the news, and there's, they're related to automobiles or automobile parts or chips or whatever industry is out there, because I think everybody, or I assume everybody here understands that each product and an HTS code is a classification, put on a specific product. So as far as the tariffs being, what's considered a tax, and that they're based on country of origin, I think first and foremost, and then it's broken down into an HTS code, which all products carry an HTS code.
Yeah.
So I wonder, Dave, how can any manufacturer assume that the tariff is correct? And, when does the tariff get applied? And, who sets we already talked about who sets the tariff, but who pays the tariff and when is it paid? I wonder if you could maybe put some color on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, expand a little bit on what John said. So tariffs are not new. We were just discussing before this call. They've been around since the time of George Washington, and it's an economic tool that's used to encourage some kind of a change in commercial behavior, right? It's a tax that's imposed on imported goods, and it's just a measure to protect supposedly domestic industries from competition. That's the core reason these things exist. So, and they're based on the goods value, right? And so we'll test everyone's Latin. I think it's ad valorem, which is just the value of the part, right? Meaning the cost of the part. So it gets applied at the time, I believe, it's at customs, right?
Yeah, it's at the time, it's weird. I use the term, it breaks the plane, right? So as it comes into,
Right. Exactly.
the United States, and it's applied to, the importer of record, whoever is bringing it in.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so it's customs broker that levies the tax, correct? And it's paid at that time, as far as I understand. So it's applied at the customs stage.
And it's applied direct. It's immediately due to customs, and this is something that we've experienced right off the bat that I think's kind of important, even with our business and what we've done. As a company brings goods into the U.S., and if they're bringing it from a country that's tariffed, that once that hits the soil as it's being brought in, that's due immediately. And it's based, like Dave said, on the value of the component. So if it's 25% and you're importing the cost of a product at $1, then that 25% is due, at the time it shows up. So, for us, when we have it, that's due at the point in time. So then whether we do our manufacturing or whatever happens at that point, and we finish a product and then we send it off, then that goes through the rest of the cycle.
Right. And so the amount, obviously, that could be set either by Congress, or there's some trade acts that are out there that, as we all know, allow the president to set specific tariff amounts as he sees fit. So that's where we're at right now. So
David and John, I wonder, the tariff gets paid by who, and does it have to be in cash or banker's check? It has to get paid right away. Is that what I'm hearing?
It won't clear customs if you don't pay it.
Yeah, and it has to be secured funds in some way, shape, or form. So we had to go through, with our customs broker, we had to go through a lot of paperwork to make sure that was done, so that could be paid at the point in time. I don't know how exact to certified funds or a money transfer or something. I believe it's to that level, but I don't know the exact level. But it is due at the time that it gets brought in, and it's the importer of record, whoever that may be. So that all depends on what Incoterms are arranged with companies. And for those who don't know what an Incoterm is, that's basically, there's a whole list of global shipping terms that everybody operates from, and all the companies or all the different countries, that determines whether it's they're picking it up on someone's dock and they're responsible for the freight, or they have to bring it to the airport of import or the port of import. However those goods and however that's arranged, that's probably a whole different ERA meeting to deal with 20 or so Incoterms. But it's whoever brings, actually the importer of record is what the document would be, and that's the person that's responsible for paying the tariff at that time.
And then the other questions, I think Walt might head down the path of what happens to those costs, and do they migrate down the supply chain?
A neat side note on this, which is a little bit off the. It was actually interesting. So we know that there have been, tariffs that were applied and then removed and applied and removed. And just for an example, we received, a check the other day from the U.S. government for, $5,000 or $6,000 for a tariff that was paid for this window that we had product. It was a 24-hour window where there was a specific tariff levied. We paid that. And then, a month and a half later, we got a check for that tariff amount of the goods that were crossed that particular day.
Oh, because they rescinded the tariff?
Right, because they rescinded the tariff, so they got it back. So it was really interesting that I never would have thought we would have seen it back, but it was just something I thought was interesting that they have that kind of control at this point.
So John, you and Dave mentioned a free trade zone. I wonder if you could elaborate. I know there was a question on the chat. What is a free trade zone? Maybe who sets them up? How do they get set up? And what does it really mean if something is going in or coming out of a free trade zone?
So I'll talk a little bit about a couple things that are along that line. So, you have a free trade zone. You also have bringing things through like inbound, which is another example of ways to I don't want to say avoid tariffs because that's not what I'm saying, but there are different mechanisms that you can do. So there are places all around the world and different cities where they'll set up a free trade zone, and the point will be to try, to the best of my knowledge, is to try to attract manufacturing into a specific area, and if you operate within that trade zone. So whether you're in China or whether you're in India or you're in the United States, the local, state, or federal government will put together a free trade zone. And that'll give you the opportunity to bring materials into that trade zone, manipulate it, do what you need to do, and then obviously export it. So in a way, you could bring materials from, if Philadelphia was a free trade zone, you could bring in all raw materials into Philadelphia, into your manufacturing facility, and you can do everything you want. And as long as it goes out of the country, then you don't get any tariffs. Versus if you were to then ship it into the rest of the United States from Philadelphia, then of course, the second it got out of Philadelphia, that would be applied. One of the things we're doing here or in Mexico is, we have, although we have, a lot of stuff qualifies for USMCA, and I can talk about what that is in a few minutes, but we've also, because the manufacturing is within Mexico and customers and everything are throughout the world, we have the ability to do two things. We can bring our raw materials inbound through the US. So if we bring in raw materials from China, India, or Eastern Europe, or whatever the country may be, we can bring them in through the US through inbound and then into Mexico, and then we can do our manufacturing here. And if we change, ultimately the HTS code, and I know we talked about that a little bit earlier, but I would say the designation, right? If you can't bring in, a baseball and then import it and then redo it and then ship it out without, getting the tariffs or at least qualifying under our USMCA. So I think, that's something that we're able to do here, both incoming and outgoing, to things that don't touch the US. So as it relates to free trade zone or an inbound, it's just a way to at least bring materials through the US and ship it out of the US without incurring the US tariffs.
But you can't just decide you want to have a free trade zone. I think US Customs has to designate it as such, and there's qualifiers.
Right.
Yeah.
Trade zones, I think, are done with local, state, or federal government.
Right.
They designate an area, and the goal is to attract manufacturers into the area.
Correct. Right.
Inbound, which is what I use, and that's a bonded warehouse. And I used something the other day with some of the folks when the original Eddie Murphy and Beverly Hills Cop, if anybody remembers that, he went into that warehouse where he found the bearer bonds, right? But he had to go in and it was all locked up. Well, that was a bonded warehouse, which is the same thing.
Right.
Now those can be created. So outside of, you could have a broker and you can have one set up, and you could as a company, you could develop your own in-bond area within your warehouse, and you can have those controls. It still has to be signed off and approved by customs or whatnot.
Right.
But that could be done in in-bond. So the two different things is you have in-bond, which is more of a kind of it can be done by companies or by customs, and then free trade zone, which is more, I think, local governments to control the manufacturing process.
So, so thanks, John and Dave. Claire, I see that there's a lot of questions coming in. I wonder if you could, read some of the questions for Dave and John.
Sure. Sure. We have one from Julie. How do you set up a bonded carrier to ship to a free trade zone?
So I think I kind of understand the question in a different, I'll try to almost re.
Do you need a
Ask
bonded
it.
carrier?
So I'll tell you, so what we have, first of all, we have a broker, and that's where I would start with all this, is that if you get a proper broker that works with an existing, either an in-bond company or that is aware of a free trade zone. A free trade zone is a physical space. That's a physical space that, materials, imagine you're making jeans or whatever. You can bring raw material in, you can do your manufacturing process, and you can send it out of that area outside of wherever the tariffs are at. So I'll use the US as an example again. So you can bring raw materials in from China and India with no tariffs into this free trade zone. You can do your manufacturing process, and then as long as it goes outside of the US, then you won't be tariffed. So I think that's probably the best way to answer it, I think.
Okay. Let's see, Steve, he would like some clarification. It seems like he says the importer of record pays the tariff to who specifically? Who is the payment actually made out to?
It goes to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol.
Okay, great. Lisa would like to know, do you have an option to enter goods as privileged or non-privileged with these new tariff updates?
Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about privileged or unprivileged. I started on a topic earlier. So one of the things that we qualify particularly is what we manufacture qualifies under USMCA still, which is US, Mexico, and Canada. And it's the original negotiation that was done about 5 or 6 years ago that replaced the original NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement. So our products that we have qualify for that, which, obviously don't carry a tariff back and forth, or at least at this moment or at this time, our products qualify under this USMCA. Privileged, I'm not sure what that is. I would assume it's something along the similar lines of an exemption of some sort, and I just don't know what that is.
Okay, maybe we'll do one more and then.
Yeah, Claire, I see a question from Chris Johnson. Is there a good website to use to know the latest tariff by country of origin? I know it changes so quick, but is there a website that you know of that manufacturers use to get the latest update of the tariffs by country of origin?
Yeah, I can share it after. I can't rattle it off, but we actually have. Chris, that's a really good question, because one thing we learned very, very early on is to make sure that we're working off of official sources. Don't just take the information off of Forbes or the website or some kind of news outlet, but there actually is something that's directly from the Department of Commerce. And if it's okay with Claire, I'll get a copy of it. It's put out by the Department of Commerce.
And actually, Hugh Daly actually responded. There's a link on the chat that Hugh has got some website that he can go to. So that could be really helpful.
I mean, .gov is the operative letters on any website that we certainly refer to here.
Dave, I had somebody text me with a question. So I think John mentioned earlier that you had tariffs in place and you paid the tariff, and then later on the tariff was somehow eliminated. You got to check back, and maybe I gabbled what you were talking about, John. What if a tariff's in place for a country and then it gets lowered? It's at 50%, it gets lowered to 25%. Do you get that money back because you paid a tariff at 50%, or is that just lost revenue, John or Dave?
So, and it's a good question. This money, I believe, came back because something was rescinded. Otherwise, when you talk about raising and lowering tariffs, it's so when the goods enter into the whatever that tariff is at that 12th hour and 4th second or whatever it is at that point in time, then that's what you're
That's
required.
what's owed
what you
at
have
that
to
time.
pay. So if it's 10% at 9 a.m. and then 20% at noon, and your product crosses at 12:01, then you're on the hook for 20%. And if it changes back down at 3, and if it changes and it's not rescinded, I'm using that word because once again, this is not my complete expertise area, but I believe the reason why we got this money back is because the whole tariff itself was rescinded, not that it was changed.
But Walter, it's a good point, and I think it stresses whether or not a manufacturer decides to include a tariff in the piece price or to invoice it separately. And all the input that we've received from our channel partners is for the sake of transparency to invoice it separately. That way we all know what those percentages are at the time we ship it out the door.
Does that perhaps expose your cost to either your distributor or to the end customer? If you break out the tariff, it's 25%, it's 25 cents, so they know that my cost is $1.
So profit margins are indeed inferred, which could lends itself to, I would say, competitive insight from our competitors. But this is where you just have to decide: is this about transparency and trust, and how we want to behave in front of our customers? So everything that we've heard talking to our channel partners says, don't worry about it. And it depends on how you feel, but on our side, I can just say that we're all about transparency and trust, or I'll just leave it at that. And
I wonder in your conversations with, I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
No, it's just a decision that you have to make.
I wonder what in your chats with other manufacturers and different distributors, is there a preferred way that they're doing it, or is some doing it, some breaking it out on the invoice? Some customers want to see it broken out. Some companies decide to embed it in the resale. What is it all over the map, or is there sort of a consistent way that people are doing this?
Well, we've absolutely heard of both ways. We've definitely heard of people who are adding it to the piece price and then people who are invoicing it separately. Every input that we've received from customers and channel partners has said very strongly that invoicing it separately is the preferred way to go. And obviously, if if people want to add it to their price, that's their want to do. And certainly some people have said that there are administrative costs that are covered by adding it to the price, and et cetera. But it also raises the value of the inventory sitting on the distributor's shelf. And in the event that tariffs were to be rescinded, or the percentages are changed, or et cetera, then you've got an inflated inventory amount, right? Just bogus margin enhancement in terms of the value of the inventory, which creates a whole slew of problems in terms of asset management and reporting and forecasting, et cetera.
Right. We've heard recently, I know as late as the last 3 or 4 days, that a lot of companies are now beginning to refuse product that has a country of origin of China, putting the orders on hold. Certainly, I just saw that one of the major online companies that we all buy from 5 times a day is beginning to restrict product coming in. I know that several of the major distributors announced over the last 3 or 4 days that they are putting orders with the country of our coming in from China on hold. What do you see as just an industry manufacturer, industry citizen? What might be the secondary or tertiary unforeseen consequences of that? Anything that jumps out?
Sure. Well, I mean, short term, there's a financial loss, obviously, and that loss is from the point of the manufacturer shipping to the distributor, and the distributor shipping to his customer, and the customer being able to ship product out the door. So if you're just putting on the brake, what did we learn during the shortages of 1.5 to 2 years ago? We learned about what we call the golden screw, how one single part can hold up an entire assembly, an entire piece of end equipment with a customer. So if people are simply going to slam the brakes on any product with a certain, in this case, country code, then there's obviously going to be repercussions all the way down the food chain. There'll be storage issues. There's going to be product that's already on trucks that are sitting there going back and forth. There'll be billing issues. There's going to be market disruption. Forecasts get messed up. There's customs complications. I mean, it won't be without work to power through the situation when a customer or a distributor makes the decision to simply not accept product immediately, which is the messaging that we've seen.
Do you see perhaps a introduction of older date code product that's floating around the people's warehouses here in the U.S., or perhaps the danger of counterfeit product entering the supply chain? Any thought on that? Either one of those, Dave or John?
We're already seeing evidence of that, Walt. We're already seeing evidence of product with older date code being floated around. We're already seeing product marketed on the internet, advertised without tariff, when we know that fresh product it would be impossible for it not to have a tariff. And certainly the gray market, as we all know, is very inventive when it comes to getting product and marketing it as such. So yeah, you're definitely going to see. It'll be a boon for them if they're creative enough to be able to get their hands on items that was built before the tariff was implemented.
So perhaps buyer beware. John, any thoughts?
Always.
Yeah, I was just going to say, another thing that kind of comes to mind, on that topic too, is if the products are, let's just say whatever this product is, it's probably everybody's getting it from probably the same region of whatever the world is, right? So, I can imagine the difficulty and the costs associated, and this is just from coming up, on the supply chain and on the buying side. I know we have a lot of people maybe on the other side here, but just some of the costs associated and the time associated to maybe get in and requalify this, and whether it's an automotive or even something more difficult like that. So we've seen, in my 20 years, I've seen a lot of different whiplashes in the supply chain, and I think that's what this gets to, because whether you're making a $1 part that's going into a Boeing aircraft, or a children's play toy, or a golf putter, whatever that may be, I think that that's going to get caught in the supply chain. And for all the reasons Dave already mentioned, on the sales side, on the manufacturing side, there's going to be a lot of people tasked with, trying to make this happen quickly. And that's probably my biggest concern with stopping this stuff down and then demanding these changes in the supply chain and then having to go through and, requalify suppliers, the cost associated, the time associated, and the effort, associated. Maybe at 250%, maybe it makes sense. I don't know, but it's definitely going to cause significant trouble in the supply chain.
So we have on this call, we have manufacturers, we have reps, and we have distributors, maybe a customer or two, I'm not sure. I think everybody is trying to get their arms around tariffs. I wonder, what have you, Dave and John, heard from the typical manufacturer? Are they looking to manage this in-house? Are they hiring third-party companies? I mean, there's a little cottage industry that's grown up overnight, like companies that will help you manage tariffs. What do you see the typical people that you talk to, how are they managing the tariffs and staying on top of it, in-house or outsourced?
Well, I can start by saying there's obviously there's a lot of sources for information, but and then there's a lot of people that have opinions, but there are people whose full-time job it is to know this inside out. And best practice is going to be to consult with as many trade compliance people, legal people, customs brokers, etc., that you can get your hands on to understand the approach that the industry is taking before you plot your own course. And most all manufacturers on this call certainly have some resource for trade compliance. If not, the distributors have trade compliance people who are really good at what they do. This obviously, they're busy right now, but they've been in place for many years because they've built free trade zones over the years. Free trade zones isn't a new concept; those have been around for a long time. So obviously, consulting with people who really know what they're talking about is key here. I mean, is there other people that you guys are talking to?
So I'll kind of talk a little bit, about us in the sense that, as I already mentioned, we're a maquiladora. So we are an importer and an exporter, and we do this all day long in and out of the U.S. And we have, a full department of some very qualified people that deal in this. What we also know is that, when you're dealing with, we'll say the people collecting this tariff being, the Border Patrol and the government, there's not a lot of room here for error. If you don't get the oops, I didn't know. The bills come in, the things happen, and the paperwork has to be right. And as a company that sends, 1 to 2 full truckloads across an international border daily, all of this stuff's gone through and it's scrutinized, by both governments, whether it's, raw material or finished good, and there's fines and there's a lot of paperwork. So anybody doing this on a regular basis from say a manufacturing standpoint, they're usually already versed, unless, they're bringing in things and they're bringing it in with their own logistics company. But yeah, I think when you talk about, a reputable broker, someone that really knows what they're doing, I think they can answer, the majority of the questions.
Yeah, I mean, opinions are less important here than really understanding the rules. The invoices are real, and the penalties for non-compliance is very real. This thing has to be taken seriously, and we all need to be on our game. Certainly because the situation keeps changing, but beyond that, because like I said, non-compliance it'll hurt you bad.
So as a manufacturer, probably has 3 or 4 or 5 distributors that are all selling the same manufacturer's product. What challenge does it offer a typical manufacturer if distributor A, B, C, D, and E are all enforcing the tariffs differently, maybe not charging the full 25%, maybe some are charging 20%, some are charging half, some aren't charging at all. What excitement does that cause the supply chain when a customer says, hey, I can get it cheaper from distributor A versus distributor B? And how does that impact a manufacturer that uses the channel to sell to the end customers? Any thoughts on that, John and Dave?
Sure. I mean, we call them channel partners for a reason, and that's what they are. And I would assume everybody on this call has great relationships with their channel partners. The key is to understand what their view is and what their particular path is, and understand what resources they have. Because as we discussed earlier, there are distributors who have free trade zones. Some might have warehouses in other countries that are not impacted by tariff. They certainly have trade compliance experts on board, and they also can share best practices for what the right thing to do is based on the customer, and also how to get creative with a customer. So there are customers who may purchase in the US, but maybe they have a contract manufacturer in another country. There's all kinds of things you can do. I won't say to skirt the system, but within a legal context, there's a variety of ways to get product to move around in a way that doesn't impact the customer negatively. But the key is just be transparent. If you've got IT bandwidth limitations where you have to take one approach and not be able to implement different approaches with each distributor, there's a way to talk to each of them just to understand what your path is. What I've learned in the last month is get ahead of it. As impossible as it sounds, is before you pull the lever on a price book, on how to invoice, on shipping a product, get ahead of it and talk to the distributors and the customers first, so they know what's coming. They know a product that's already in backlog is impacted because of the country of origin. They know that you're going to ship product and how you're going to invoice it. Get ahead of it so there's no surprises. That's really the whole thing. There's no surprises, because negotiations are going to have to happen. It's okay. I mean, we negotiate solutions all the time. That's what we do, right? We're salespeople. But by getting ahead of it and communicating up front, and don't wait to just react, but really start having the conversation sooner rather than later, that will help alleviate a lot of the problems.
There's a question on the chat from Henry. Being that you're operating under the Maguila framework, can you ship within Mexico to your Mexico customers tariff-free? You specifically as a manufacturer there in Mexico, not specifically Ohmite, but what can you do that?
So yeah, that's actually something we've tested out more recently. You know, when we were under NAFTA, and even originally with the USMCA, we were very particular about how we brought everything back into the US, and we had one particular ship point. There are some hurdles, because if you ship directly out of Mexico, then that income, whatever the tax, whatever that government income could necessarily need to be paid depending on how you do it. There are other ways around it. There are virtual transfers and different things you can do. But we have actually, over the last month, we've tested out a few different theories. One is the shipping both inbound through the US and then out to other countries. And then also we've shipped direct to other countries from Mexico. So yes, it's possible. But what we've learned, the easiest way to do, even if we're shipping it in Mexico, is we ship it into the US in inbound. So then it goes to, as we talked earlier, so it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't technically hit. It's like a consulate, right? There's this building that is not part of U.S. soil, kind of. It's separate, and then shipped back into Mexico, and then that's a way you can avoid the tariff. And then for us being, even though we have a maquiladora license and there's responsibilities there. So the thing that I found the best, even though we've done each, because going through an inbound warehouse, you're talking about a paperwork fee. That's the cost associated. So we found that it's actually best to continue to ship in through an inbound warehouse and then out to the rest of the world, even if it's here in Mexico.
So if the tariff, people it says texted me, if the tariff is being embedded in the resale and not broken out, is there a, well, there's would the company end up overinflating their revenue? Would it in fact be paying their salespeople on an inflated resale, higher commissions, higher rep commissions, direct, I mean, your revenue goes up 25%, when in fact you haven't shipped anything else. What challenges does that offer to a manufacturer or a rep or a distributor on this call when the tariff is inflating end revenue?
Well, if the manufacturer is honest about if they select to add it to the price, if they're honest about adding to the price only the percent that was the tariff, then it shouldn't inflate revenue at all, because they still have to pay the tariff, right? So it's just now part of the cost, I guess. Although commissions would be higher, since you are paying a percent of resale. And like I said before, it would certainly create problems down the road if the tariffs were rescinded or reduced and the same units went out the door. It's going to look like revenue is down dramatically. So
I think one of the points, I think too, right, it's a separate invoice line item for the tariff itself to keep from the revenue going on. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure. We've heard of some suppliers that said, okay, the tariff is, I'll use basic numbers here, the tariff is 10%, but we're going to say it's not 10% of our cost. We're going to say it's 10% of our selling price, because we've had to spend all this time with IT and customer service and all this administrative stuff. We've heard of people doing that. That's their decision.
So so now on the manufacturing side, right? So outside of the sales side of our finished good, we also bring in, raw materials. And in that case, you have other, if I have a supplier that's in the US and they get raw materials from outside of the country, they try to add, maybe they'll try to add we're adding 25% for, whatever reason. And then, the discussion comes in, why would you be giving me a 25% cost increase on the cost of this $1 part? You're bringing in a few components, and these components may have that, right? And because this also would include, when you have a finished product, you've got labor and overhead and all those things. So, you can't, it wouldn't be fair for them to charge me 25% on the labor, overhead, and the other components that, they use that aren't from outside of the country when they're manufacturing, in the US. So we've had a few, and they're smaller. It's not, these are people, this is a very complicated topic, as we all know, but, the discussion has to be had that, I'm sorry, I'm not paying you $1.25 for this $1 part, because only 20% of the content is actually tariffable. So, that's an extra 5 cents. So I'll pay you $1.05, and then let's all move on.
Customers are trying to ensure that companies are not marking up the tariff or making profit on the tariff. And
Right.
I know some of us remember precious metal adders, and we had to break it out, and it was just you needed a degree in Boolean algebra to figure it out sometimes. I know Doug has a suggestion that the challenge is we need the customer to agree to pay the tariff before we ship. And it's an interesting. I agree, Doug. I don't know how you enforce it. What happens if the customer says no? I'm not going to pay the tariff. What have you generally heard over the jungle drums, David and John, over what companies are doing if the customer refuses to pay the tariff?
Well, on the most extreme end, negatively, they go on credit hold. Then I would say, if you want to swing the pendulum to the other side, we need to understand the customer's objection, and advance notice is key, like we mentioned before. And then we have to educate. This is not in our control. This is not something that any individual in this room elected to do. So, but I would say what we've heard is that if a customer was aware of an item going out the door with a tariff and they accepted the product, paid for the product, but are not paying the invoice for the tariff, then that puts them in harm's way in terms of their ability to get product down the road because they're now a credit risk. But this is where things start to get ugly, Walt. This is where you start pulling out contracts and start looking at the very granular nitty-gritty terms in the contracts that we rarely have to look at. And now we get into protracted discussions. So at the risk of trying to end the topic without leaving a bad taste in everyone's mouth, get ahead of it. Tell them beforehand, do you want, this product is going. This product is going out the door. Now the customer might say, well, it didn't have a tariff when I placed the order. So we understand that. But by the time the product was produced, the rule said it had to go out with a tariff. So they need to know in advance, this is going to come to you with a tariff.
Something I think that was really interesting that we ran into early on is when we obviously, if we manufacture in Mexico and we were going into the U.S. and that tariff would be applied on anything that crosses into the U.S. border. And although you may have a customer, over in Europe that is placing an order with a U.S. based company, and then when there's all of a sudden there's a tariff on that, and this was very early on, and they're like, well, I don't understand why I would pay a tariff. I'm buying it from this U.S. company, and to have that discussion, is really complicated in the beginning, but it really puts a lot of, it puts things into perspective. Now, as I said, we've got a way, and we ship through inbound, and we can go anywhere throughout the world, whether there's a tariff or not, say between these two countries. But, it does open your eyes at all of the different aspects, as, I'm sure everybody on this call, it's a very global industry, whether it doesn't matter whether you're a manufacturer rep or whatever. So, just some of these discussions, and then, just the frustration and confusion. And it's nice that it's starting to settle down now. At least it's been a little quieter as far as day to day, which has given us an opportunity to react and respond.
As salespeople, which most of us are, we have to remember that preserving goodwill is very important here. I'm not here to say if what we're dealing with right now is permanent or short-term or long-term, but how we make customers feel now will affect our ability to work with them later on when this thing is over. And like it's been mentioned, we've been through so many gyrations over the last years, and how we handle ourselves now is exceptionally important.
So how quick, if the tariffs get adjusted, I know we've seen some changes over the last 30 days. Countries have this tariff and it's increased. How quick does a manufacturer have to react? How quick does a distributor have to react? How do they do that? I mean, do they have people that can just flick the switch and all of a sudden capture the tariff and then pass it along to the customers? It seems to be, you as a manufacturer, what challenges that portend to you folks?
Having to create price books that changed hourly and literally. So it's very important for the manufacturers to have a robust price and quotes and backlog management process in place where changes can be made very quickly. And so, I mean, I've spoken with some distributors that talked about receiving 3 different price files from a manufacturer within 1 week due to the changes that occurred or mistakes that were found, to be honest. And you know what? It's okay. We're supposed to be fleet of foot, and it does create some burden on the manufacturers because we have to build within our IT infrastructure how much to invoice based on the HTS code, how to get the price file out, get it out to the reps, get it out to the customers, alert the customer what the impact is on his backlog, right? So it has created, I'll just say, an awful lot of meetings and an awful lot of spreadsheets going around, but that's just the way it needs to be, Walt.
From a supply chain side too, it's the same thing, because I know you look at just maybe the product going out, but we're having the global supply chain. There's every day, there's materials coming in from everywhere. So if it changes, everything is impacted, as well as, like I said, 1 to 2 truckloads just a day across the border, from between the manufacturing facility and our distribution facility. So yeah, you have to work really quick as things change. But one of the good things was, we set up a lot of systems. We have a lot in place between Dave, myself, and the rest of the people here, where we set the system up in the beginning so it can change as things are very fluid. We don't get the joy of the old days of hearing about something and then taking a month to react and get it in place. I mean, we usually hear about it pretty much when it's happening. So.
I wonder, do we have any questions, Claire, on the Kate, on the chat we want to go to?
Yeah, we do. Let's see, Dan. He wants to know, what is the best way to determine price on long lead time items? For an example, 6 months from order to delivery. Does a PO theoretically have an unlimited price during the lead time? If price is TBD, how does commerce flow?
Ooh, well, I can say what industry practice is that once an order is booked, the price remains, and rarely is backlog pricing changed. And some of us in the manufacturing world know that there's things like price protection. So if a manufacturer were to lower his prices and publish them as such, then they lower backlog prices. But if prices go up, then the backlog is protected. As far as the tariff is concerned, this has been a challenge because we just mentioned it before. An order is booked, I don't know, 20 weeks ago. And then 5 weeks ago, we learned about a tariff. And so we have to say to the customer, oh, by the way, we're holding your price, but there's going to be a second line item with a tariff attached of a certain percentage. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's our understanding regarding how most of the manufacturers are doing it right now.
I wonder, we don't want to run out of time. We're coming to about 5 minutes left. We've got manufacturers, reps, and distributors on the call, I believe, and maybe a customer or two. I wonder what words of advice, David and John, you could give to the manufacturers, reps, and distributors. What do they need to do now when they hang up the phone? Hopefully this hour has been educational. What's the takeaway from the call? What do you need to do? What do you need to do internally? What do you need to do for your end customer, for your suppliers, for your reps? What's sort of the takeaway from the call?
Don't learn when the customer learns that there's going to be a tariff applied. Understand from the manufacturer what the countries of origin are. And that sounds painfully obvious, but some manufacturers' price files have 40,000 part numbers in them with country of origin. It's like a geography, Walter. It's like spinning the globe. There's all kinds of different countries in there. And so I think it's important to take the time and really study what parts are being affected by a tariff. Check your point of sale, check your sales, so you can double check with the manufacturer that the customer is going to be impacted eventually. They're buying through distribution. They may not know right away, but they'll sure find out when the manufacturer ships to the distributor and then they ship to the end customer. And then it's okay to explore alternatives. Within a legal frame of mind, it's okay to say, where are your contract manufacturers? Do you have warehouses in non-US areas? Well, tell me about your global footprint. Any reason to talk to a customer is generally a good thing, unless they're PO'd, right? And but even if they are, I think it's a chance to sit down and get as creative as you possibly can. Not saying that manufacturers are going to have a lot of wiggle room, but you'd be surprised at some of the things we've heard that people are doing legitimately to power through this thing. And then, know the contracts, understand the contracts. I really hope this doesn't get ugly, as everyone on the call agrees. We hope this doesn't turn into products sitting on DHL trucks or FedEx trucks. Nobody wants it. Manufacturer doesn't want to take it back. Distributors don't want to accept it. Customer doesn't want it. That's not a good thing. So I think if we, get ahead of it and understand now what the impacts are, then we'll all be better off.
John?
Understand the customer's objection. They're not happy about this. Who on this call is, right?
John, any advice for the audience as far as what they should be talking to their manufacturers about or to their distributors about?
Well, I think the same point to what Dave said earlier. I think first of all, make sure you're getting your information from, like a government website or whatever. And then the only advice I could give from a manufacturing standpoint is, when I talk about having a good broker, having the discussion with the people that deal with this day to day, because it's very complicated, and with all the changes, I think there's a ton of great companies out there that are well versed in this and deal with this all the time. So I would just be very cautious of, just make sure that whoever you're using or whatever you're using, they're well versed in this type of, these type of discussions, these type of shipments, and this type of situation.
And I think for the manufacturers reps on the call, to state the obvious, I think you need to be aware of all the different policies and procedures from your different distributor partners. They may not all be the same. If they're all selling to your biggest customer, you need to know how they might vary, how they're different, especially if they might be buying the same product from two different distributors because of supply chain. You need to be aware of what your channel partners are doing. Probably the best way is to go to the local branch or call your regional, so that I think, to John and Dave's point, that you have the facts. This is a very complicated, uncharted areas. All of us are spending thousands, millions of dollars trying to manage it, try to do the right thing. First of all, by the customer. Secondly, by your distributor partner, by your manufacturer, and by your own company, to make sure that you're not stepping over dollars to pick up nickels. So, Claire, Claire or Kate, any final questions we want to go to? What do you want to, it's about 5 o'clock. If there's no other questions, maybe take us home, Claire.
Okay, thanks, Walter, and thank you, John and Dave, for taking the time to share your insights with us today. This was, I know, hugely informative and helpful for all of us. As a reminder, this session was recorded. The recording will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. The next ERA Live will take place on Tuesday, May 13th at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. It will feature the Outpace Rep Group, and the topic is the role development of regional sales managers. And that is based on the group's newly published white paper on that topic. So it's sure to be a good one, and please tune in. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks. Take care.